Hello and welcome to Showband Heroes, where we get to meet the men and women who created the most successful live music era in Irish history and who entertained us throughout the 60s and 70s and kept us dancing with each other even during our darker days. My guest today is Jim Harte. It's great to see you, Jimmy, even if you are at the other side of the world. How are you doing? Are you playing away and doing some gigs?
Yeah, I'm still doing a few gigs, but due to COVID, I mean, we're all sort of restricted to when and how and where we can play. But it's easing up a lot here now. So I'm working this Friday, and I've got one the following week as well. But it's not as much as I'd like, but it's better than nothing.
Well, you've had an amazing career. It's stretched probably longer than the vast majority of the show band heads, as they used to call them. How did it all start for you, and when did it start, and why did it start?
I have to go back to the very beginning. I started off playing the accordion when I was 8, and through that I started a trio called Heartbeats when I was 12. And we used to play at girls' colleges all around Dublin. Milltown comes to mind straight away. There was a girls' college in Milltown. And we used to play there. And so it was 2 accordions and drums. A guy called Pete Brady, who went to play with the Casino for a while on drums. You may have heard of him, I'm not sure.
Certainly heard of the Casino, yeah. It's great, man.
Yeah, well, Pete was a drummer with them for a while. And Pete was my drummer when we had the trio. So it was just 2 accordions and drums. It was really cool. And then I bought a guitar for £1, and so I started singing. And one guy would play the accordion, and I would sing. And Jailhouse Rock was the first one that we did. And Pete used to do the intro on drums with the accordion playing the chords intro, you know, da, da. And that's how I started with the singing thing. And I went away to the Isle of Man with 3 fellas for a holiday. It was my first holiday, like really on my own in a foreign country.
What year was this?
It was 1958. It was our last night there, and we went to an open air concert. And so we're all sitting there enjoying the concert, and they had all kinds of acts on, and they were bringing them up one by one. They had a little girl, this Shirley Temple, you know, the usual stuff, yeah. A magician, some operatic singer. And then he said, okay, our last guest today is a young man all the way from Dublin, and he's going to sing. And his name is Jimmy Harte. And I'm looking around for this guy. And all of a sudden, one fella each side of me lifted me up on the stage. And that was it. I stood looking at this fella, and he said to me, welcome, what are you going to do? I was terrified, absolutely terrified. So I looked at him, and there was a piano. It was like a good size orchestra, probably about 10-piece orchestra, and there was a big grand piano. And by then I was doing piano stuff. I was doing Jerry Lee Lewis and all that stuff. So I said to him, do you think the guy would let me play the piano? And he said, I don't know. So we asked him. The guy said, yeah, sure. So he said to me, okay, so what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to sing and play the piano. Oh, so I sang it, and I did what I say, you know, the Ray Charles thing.
Yeah.
And I won. To my amazement, I got £5, which is really big, you know.
How old were you then?
I was 16. Yeah, so that's where when I went home and told my mother that I was after winning the talent competition, the next weekend I was on the Liffey on a boat in another talent competition that my mother roped me into. And on that boat, I met 3 guys who were a little group, and they were starting a band. And they asked me would I go and join them as a singer. And that was my first venture into what they called a show band at that time. And they were called the Crescendos. And they played every Monday night in the Ritz in Ballyfermot. This is only when Ballyfermot was really only being built up at the time. So the Ritz was a big corner building, and it was a dance hall. And I think subsequently it became a supermarket, like they all did. But at that time, it was a dance hall. And I stayed with them for a while. And then another band offered me a job with them. And they were playing every Saturday night in the Mayfair in Clondalkin.
Were you playing in two bands at the same time, or did you leave one?
Yeah. So Monday night I was playing with the crescendos, and Saturday night I was playing with the mellow notes.
So what part of Dublin were you from?
Ringsend Road I lived on, just around the corner from Showband Park.
Yeah.
And I had no transport because I didn't have a car or anything like that. And so the guy that ran the mellow notes, he used to pick up all the band, and he had a Ford Consul. And he used to have the bass, the roof, the drums on the roof, and 6 guys in the car. You know, so it was real 5-star stuff. You know.
Or was it all rock and roll, or what were you playing?
Yeah. It was the pops of the day, you know, wherever they were, and rock and roll. Yeah. At
that time, Elvis would have been just about breaking through, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was Elvis. Who else would have been? Cliff Richard to a certain extent. And then you had all the offshoots from the rock and roll days, like even Bill Haley, you know.
Yeah.
Rock Around the Clock and all that stuff.
Rock Around the Clock changed everything, didn't it?
Yeah, that was the start of it. I just did a program here based on like the history of rock and roll, and I started how it evolved. And I started off with there was a guy who sang Shake, Rattle and Roll. Yeah. And tempo or that rhythm started the whole thing off, and then Bill Haley did Rock Around the Clock, and I mean that was the end. It just went wild after that. You know?
You were hugely influenced by that sound then, were you?
Elvis Presley influenced me a lot, you know, and Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard to a certain extent, you know, all that era. I think not only me, I think anybody that was around at that time were influenced by those people.
When you started to play with the little bands, I mean, were you standing up at the mics? Were you playing?
Yeah. I'm going to send you a photograph.
That suggests again that the Showbands weren't the first people to go out front and just and perform like that.
No, that the mellow notes. I don't know whether you would call it the beginning of Showbands, but we were all standing. The only one sitting was a piano player and a drummer. We had lead, rhythm, bass, sax, and trumpet.
Were you the youngest from the band, or were they all your own age?
No, I was probably the youngest, but there might have been one or two, maybe a year or two older than me.
Yeah. So you were all learning together. You were learning your trade together.
Crescendos, they were a little band who, or a trio, who played together in their houses, and then decided they got this job in the Ritz because they were a local band, and the guy who owned the hotel or dance hall was keen to give them a go. And I think that's how they got the gig. I came in the second week because I only met them 2 weeks before, and then we had a bit of a rehearsal, and then we went, you know, so yeah.
Were you playing to dancers, or were there people sitting down just listening to you?
Oh, no, it was dancers, yeah. So
from day one, the important thing to sustain any band was to play for dances.
Yeah, it was all that. And that was a big hall. I mean, and it was packed every Monday night.
Did you have your own PA system, or was there one supplied by the hall?
Yeah, they had a PA system. They had 2 small little boxes.
Was the piano mic'd, or
it wasn't? It was a claveline. Yeah.
What is that? What's a claveline?
It's a small keyboard. It's about that size. It's about 2.5 octaves, or maybe 3 octaves. Yeah. But you remember Telstar?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. By the Tornadoes.
One of those.
Even at this stage, you were able to plug a keyboard into the PA?
You know, I think he had a little amplifier he had.
That's fascinating. I really didn't know that you had an electric keyboard at that stage. Can you remember what year that would have been, Jim? It
would have been about 58.
That's amazing. And was it like, you say it was about like a 2-octave keyboard, was it?
Yeah, it might have been a bit bigger. And it had a control on the knee, so he could bend the notes.
Oh, it sounds like the forerunner of some kind of synthesizer.
Probably was.
Could you play a chord on it, or was it just single note thing?
No, you could play chords on it too, but mainly single notes is what he played. He did a lot of solo stuff too.
So what happened after that?
I started to work at Guinness's factory.
Right.
I did an exam for Guinness's because somebody told my parents it was the best job in the world, and pension and the whole lot. So I did an exam and got it. I just done a scholarship and got that, and to go to uni, but then this Guinness thing came up, and they thought that would be better, that it's more secure and blah, blah, blah. You know, so I did that. But then I left the Mellow Notes to join another band. I always wanted to do, you know, you do this and then you find that there's something that you can do to expand. And I was always trying to expand. And so I joined a band called the Ambassador Showband, which is the first band that really had the name Showband on the end of it. I don't think Mellow Notes had Showband on the name on the end, even though they were really a Showband. The Ambassadors were the first one to use the Showband tag. And we played around town quite a lot in Dublin, but every Sunday we played at the Kevin Street Police Station. And that was a full house. It was a real, very, very popular place.
Was that some kind of a social club, or was it?
Yeah, it was run by the police.
Because it sounds as echoes of Jailhouse Rock there, I thought for a second.
Yeah, you think so. It could have been.
Playing to the inmates.
Yeah, so that went on for probably, I don't know, 8 months, maybe a year. I really can't remember how long. I knew Tony Bogan through, because he worked in Guinness's too, the drummer that was with Miami. And him and I worked together quite a bit. And we always had sing-songs at work. So I had a guy playing two spanners on a bit of a metal box, and I just yell away all these Elvis Presley songs. And Tony Bogan would be playing the drums with the two, you know, whatever he could find.
But of course, the Miami wasn't established at that, so it wasn't even.
No. He was with the Downbeats, the rhythm quartet.
Right.
One day he came to me at work and asked me, would I be interested in joining a band? And I said, well, look, I'm with this band now, and we do the gig in Kevin Street every Sunday. And he said, oh, well, come along and have a listen. And I said, yeah, okay. So they came along, him and Joe Tyrrell. And they came to the gig on a Sunday. And at the end of the gig, we went out and we had a coffee. And that's when Joe Tyrrell asked me, would I be interested in joining a new band that was just starting up? And I said to him, you know, what's it about? And he said, it's going to be big. And I said, look, I said, I've been with these guys now for a while, you know. And he said, no, this is going to be big. And he kept saying that all the time. And we want you to join. And you're going to, you know. So, yeah, I did. I told the other guys I was leaving. And I went into the unknown with them. You know, there was a brand new band. Nobody had heard of them. But they were launching the band at the Palm Beach Hotel on Easter weekend.
In Portmarnock?
Yeah. So that's where the band was launched.
They hadn't done any gigs whatsoever before you joined.
They had done one gig, but not in the IRN. The guy who ran the IRN knew Tom Doherty, and Tom asked him, could he put the band in for a bit of a practice?
Who was in the band at that stage when they did that one-off gig?
Well, the Downbeats, which was Clem Quinn, Marty Phelan, Joe Tyrrell, and Tony Bogan. They were the nucleus. I'm not sure if Morty did that gig or not. I think he did, because Morty was there when I went. And I think I remember him mentioning a gig that they did the week before.
Was that gig under the name the Miami, or was it under the name the Downbeats?
I don't know. I never asked the question, to be honest. But I known Tom Doherty, I'm sure it was, you know, because or else he would hold it back for the Palm Beach thing. I think the IAM was really just a practice.
And of course, Tom Doherty went on. He must have been impressed, because he went on to manage the band for forever, didn't he? Yeah.
Tom was a sweet man, very sweet man. He was a shrewd businessman, very shrewd.
Yeah.
And didn't take fools lightly at all, you know. But he knew what was going on, and he made sure that it went the right way, you know. So we opened Palm Beach on that Easter weekend, and I mean, he put a lot into advertising prior to the Easter weekend. So we were there for the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday.
How was that received, Jim?
Oh, it was packed. Absolutely jam-packed, yeah. The people that owned the hotel, they put a lot of effort into it too, you know, and they did a lot of advertising as well. So I think all of Dublin knew that there was a new hotel, new ballroom, and a new band starting for Easter.
At that stage, it was a big room, wasn't it? It wasn't. I remember in the 80s, it was divided into the disco, and then there was also sort of like a cabaret lounge as well. But
Yeah,
it was one big room at that stage, yeah.
It was a big ballroom, yeah.
And how did people get out there? Must have went out on buses, did they, from the city centre?
Yeah, I think they ran buses out to it. By then I had a car, so I was independent.
So the lineup then of the very first Miami was
Tony Bogan on drums, Joe Tyrrell on keyboards, Clem Quinn on guitar, Marty Phelan on sax, Tommy O'Rourke on trumpet, and Morty on trombone, and Tony Harris on bass.
And that was the classic Showband lineup. The band obviously were always very slick, really well dressed. Did you have that sort of ethos in the band straight away?
Because I came along towards the beginning, but not at, you know, I wasn't ready like they were. They all had gone and got measured for suits, whereas I didn't have time to they wanted to take photographs, and we got photographs taken out of Palm Beach, but I just wore a suit. So in the photograph, which I'll send you to, is me in the lineup, but I've got a dark suit. And Tommy O'Rourke is always taking the mickey out of me, saying I was trying to be the leader.
Well, that was the thing, wasn't it? That very often the lead singer had a different color suit or a white jacket.
No, it wasn't like that. We all had the same color suits. It's just that mine wasn't ready when the photographs were being taken.
All of those guys, all terrific musicians. Who was doing the arrangements?
Tommy O'Rourke mostly. I would say of the whole lot, he was probably the best musician in the band. The most skilled from a point of view of, you know, reading music, writing music, the whole lot. I mean, I could do it too, but I couldn't do it like him. I couldn't do an arrangement, for instance, but he could.
So had anybody in the band ever been in a sit-down band that had to make that transition out front?
Probably me. I might be the only one. I'm not sure. Tommy O'Rourke played with all the old bands like Joe Coughlin and in the Metropole. The Metropole used to have an orchestra, and Tommy played in those bands. So he would have had the most experience. He played with, you know, all of the bands that were playing in the hotels in Dublin at that time.
I'm always fascinated by the transition from the sit-down bands to the bands that stood up and threw away the music stands and made eye contact with the audience. Because before that, when people were sitting down behind the music, they didn't make eye contact with the audience. And that was the key, wasn't it?
I mean, the Showband thing brought the bands to the audience, whereas before, the band were a noise in the background for people to dance to, and they didn't communicate with anybody. A little story, I don't know whether you know this or not, but I learned because I did this gig with a band for 3 years in the Olympic Ballroom in Dublin. And that was all reading. And I just sat there like a dummy until I had to sing. And then I'd get up and sing and sit down again. But, you know, people talk about what number will we do next? But that all came from the orchestra, because the orchestra had a big book of arrangements. And at the top of each corner was a number. So the band leader would call out, we'll do number 12, 24, 65, and 3, you know. So they'd go and they'd pick out the numbers. Half of them would never know what the name of the song was, but they knew what number it was. And that's how let's do a number. That's how that came about.
So was it a success straight away? How did you begin to branch out? Obviously, you had your gig in Portmarnock. What happened after that? Did the word spread?
Yeah. Yeah, like when you're in the thing, well, I used to think that people were coming up and queuing outside. You know, when I'd get there, say the gig started at 8 o'clock, I'd get there at maybe 6:30, 7:15, and there'd be a queue like a mile long. I used to think that the people were queuing up outside because the venue was great. And that was my thinking. I never thought that they were coming to see the band. And it took me a while to realize that it was the band that they were coming to see. Because up till then, it didn't happen. You know, people always went to the great venue. It's a great venue. We have to go there. But it was never, it's a great band, you know. And it was only down the track at Palm Beach that I realized, they're actually coming to see us. You know?
Well, it was a change in mindset, because the bands up until then were bands orchestras that were resident in various venues around the. I mean, even places like Cleary's.
Bill Cairns is one of them. Jack Flav, who was in the Olympic. Joe Coughlin was in the Metropole. Earl Gill was in the Shelbourne. There were lots of them, you know.
Well, some of those you mentioned there, they made the transition, didn't they? I mean, Earl Gill had a very successful, great trumpet player, great career, didn't he? Afterwards, with was it the Hoedowners?
Yeah, with Sean Dunphy. Yeah, I ended up playing with Earl Gill in the Fiesta in Dublin. That was one of the last things I did before I left Ireland.
Was there any talk of a record?
No. There was no. I mean, that was like, you wouldn't even think of it, you know. It was something that was not even mentioned or talked about or anything. It was about 2 years later that it really sort of started to develop into that, you know.
The Miami launched in Portmarnock was that 62?
Yeah, 62. Yeah.
So it kind of coincided with what was happening in the UK which I always say that the 60s in the UK started on the 5th of October 1963 with the launch of Love Me Do by the Beatles, but it was beginning to bubble in the UK as well, and there was a transition happening there. I often like to think it was a revolution.
That's what they called it, because I remember I moved to live in England, and I had written a song which was picked up by Gordon Mills on a publishing company called Valley Music, and one of the guys who did backing vocal on that was Alan Tarney, who did a lot of work with Cliff Richard. And we were going to the studio one day, and he said to me, "Do you think the revolution is happening?" And it was the first time I'd heard the word, you know. And I thought, that's a good word to sort of sum up what was going on, you know, because young people were now starting to take off, you know.
Going back to the Miami, how did it spread from Dublin? Did Tom Doherty start to book you in venues around the country?
Yeah, within a very short space of time, we were working 5 nights a week.
Where were you working? Where?
Everywhere from Dublin down to Cork, up to Belfast, across to Galway, covering the whole country, really.
Do you remember that the palm trees on the van? Did you have that van?
That wasn't there then. In that time, we had 2 minibuses, Volkswagen minibuses. Sometimes we only had one, and it was sort of a bit squashy. But so that was the start. I know when we we used to come back to Dublin at maybe 4, whatever it was in the morning. And we used to drive down Fairway or Fairview. And there would be this milkman delivering milk in the bottles. And we would always stop. And Marty, myself, and anybody who was in the van. And we'd always buy a pint of milk off him. And we'd sit aside the road and drink this milk. And it was so cool. That's one memory that I've got of the coming home stages. If we didn't do that, we would go to one of those late night eating places, which there were a few of, where bands used to congregate. And then you'd meet other fellows that were from other bands who were either going north, but they came here to get a meal before they went on. Yeah, so there was a lot of collaboration between bands. It was really good, very friendly. You know, the atmosphere was great.
Apart from yourself, I mean, Murty also has a great voice. So did you share the vocals, or did you do all of the vocals?
No, we shared it. I didn't. Probably I was what they would call the main singer, but Morty sang quite a lot. Morty was really good, and so did Martin. Martin sang quite a few as well. He did a lot of those Dixieland kind of songs, you know.
Always good to get the crowd dancing, isn't it?
The acapella kind of thing, you know. There was one time we played in Romanos in Belfast, which is a lovely venue. When we got to the gig, we found that we were playing with Val Doonigan. He was doing a little tour, and Joe Tyrrell came to me and he said, Val Doonigan wants piano and drums. And I said, well, that's great, a little break. No, he said, no, I want you to play the piano with Val Doonigan. And I said, but you're the piano player. No, he said, no, I'm not playing the piano. I'm busy. I've got a lot of stuff to do. So I got stuck to play the piano with Val Doonigan and Tony Bogan on drums.
Val Doonigan at that time was doing kind of a country side. Walk Tall, I think, was the big hit.
Oh yeah, that was there. All those songs were huge at that time. He had a #1 hit, which I think was Walk Tall.
Yeah, he did. He made it big in Britain. He was from Waterford, I think, Val Doonigan.
Yeah. Lovely man.
You mentioned earlier on that as one of the bands used to collect you in a console, a big Ford console, and that you'd put the double bass on
the roof.
On the roof. But with the Miami, did it ever have a double bass, or were you straight in with the electric bass?
No, it was Tony Harris on a big Fender.
That changed everything as well, didn't it? Obviously, having played with the band with a double bass, now playing with an electric bass changed the sound, didn't it?
I thought it was terrific, yeah, because it was prominent, you know. I think that's why I'm going a little bit deaf now. Too many years standing beside the speakers. You know, those bass players are like, God.
Oh, yeah, well, don't blame us. Blame the offender. Later on, obviously, when bands wanted to become established, and even today, you know, they got radio play, they got airplay, obviously with records. And so how did Tom Doherty establish the band around the country? How were people hearing about you?
Radio, through the media, and he used to do ads on radio and stuff like that, but mainly through the newspaper. In the Herald and in the press on Saturday, they had a big Showband thing. You know, we often had 2 full pages of just about the Miami with photographs, you know, of everybody and a little write-up on everybody. He pushed it and pushed it. And he spent a lot of time promoting the band. But then, as well as that, you had people like at the Reynolds Brothers who had a whole chain of ballrooms. So if you played in one venue, then you played in them all.
That was Albert and Jim. Albert went on to be Taoiseach, obviously. And all the ballrooms that they had ended in land, didn't it? It was Dreamland, Barrowland.
Moatland, there was Lakeland.
Jetland in Limerick, I think. Was your contemporaries were. Brendan Boyer was huge at the time. Did he have the Hucklebug at that stage?
I'm not sure. I know that Chubby Checker was out with the Hucklebug and Let's Twist Again, because Morty used to do those 2 songs. And I remember we drove to a gig in Belfast, and when we got to Belfast, we found we were playing with Chubby Checker, but we didn't know that until we got there.
The Royal had the biggest single. Showband single of all time with the Hucklebug. Very few people realised that, as you mentioned, Chubby Checker had recorded before it didn't go anywhere, but even before that, Frank Sinatra recorded.
But I always thought that Brendan Boyer as a showman was fantastic.
Yeah.
He put 150% into it, you know, not 100%, 150. I know the last time I actually met him was in Galway. We were playing up there, and him and Derek Dean from the Freshmen. There was a hotel across the road from O'Connor's, which is the dance hall beside O'Connor's. And I went across to this little hotel, and the 2 boys were in there, and we sat there for, I don't know, 2 hours just talking about bands and music and this one and that one, you know. But That was the good thing about show bands. I think there was no jealousy of one person or another. It was all camaraderie. You'd meet fellas on the road who were going south and you were going north, and they'd stop in the town and have a coffee or a drink or whatever it was, and then a bit of a chat, and then they'd go on to do their gig and you'd go on to do yours.
I mean, the fact that the business itself was blossoming, it was booming. So the more show bands, the better, the healthier it was at that stage. So there didn't need to be a rivalry, did there?
Yeah, we did the marquee thing as well, which was an experience in itself. Particularly on a rainy night, as you know too well.
The mud in a field was a problem, especially for the girls whenever there was the girls were playing the bands. But for some reason, when it rained, even a light shower on the marquee, the sound was better in the marquee.
It dampened the echo. Yeah,
it was. And as a bass player, I remember that it kept the sound inside the tent. All of these things, and there was always dodgy power supplies as well. You weren't quite sure if you were going to get enough juice.
I got a few belts.
Did you? Yeah.
In marquees, yeah.
You used to sink a big metal bar into the ground, I think, for an earth or something like that.
I enjoyed them. They were fun times. I remember before I joined in Miami, I got a call from a guy who I didn't know, from Adam. He said, "I've got a gig down in Cork. Are you free?" And I said, yeah, sure. He said, "Okay, be in O'Connell Street, Westmoreland Street at this time." So we had to pick one fellow up in Georgia Street. Oh yeah, it was Norman Metcalf. You know Norman?
Oh, I do, yeah.
He had a big Hammond organ, and we were all in a Volkswagen minibus. So I still, to this day, don't know how we all got in and fit it in the car. Well, I was going to school, I remember, because on the way down, I was studying for some exam that I was going to do. And on the way back, I was trying to sleep. And by then, they had all copious bottles of Guinness, and they were happy. Nobody wanted me to sleep, so... Yeah, they were the kind of gigs that you got every now and again. They were awful, but fun nevertheless.
Sort of pickup gigs, they used to call them, didn't they? You weren't sure who was going to play with you.
It was a good way to learn your trade, and if you got a good gig, then it was a really good one, compared to the other ones.
Talk about learning your trade. I mean, singers have evolved as well, and they have to learn the breathing techniques and the singing techniques. So, but you had a great mentor in Noel Keelan, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah, because I as I mentioned to you before, I joined Jack Flabb's orchestra in the Olympic, and it was a 6 nights a week thing. And every night, I'd get up and sing a song, and the trumpet player who sat beside me would say that was rubbish, the worst thing I've ever heard. And that went on for several months until I mentioned it to Noel Keelan that I was going to hit him. And Noel said, no. He said, there's a few things that you need to get sorted out. And he mentioned intonation, phraseology, and a couple of other words that I'd never heard of. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about even. So he said, look, come up to the house and we'll go through a few things. And Noel actually changed my whole life. I'm forever indebted to Noel Keelan because he really became the one who straightened me out in what singing was all about. Up till then, I was just a shadow, a guy who would sing words, but not really study the words, but just sing. So it was just words coming out of my mouth without thinking about the song. So particularly in a slow song where you've got some light and shade, that's the only way I can put it. A lot of singers then didn't put any light and shade in. They just sang it like that. Noel Keelan was the one who taught me the light and the shade.
So what Tommy Dorsey was to Frank Sinatra, Noel Keelan was to you. Yeah, very much so. And I only sent a message to his wife last year, I think it was, just to tell her that. Because when I used to go to the house, she used to make me
dinner and all that, and then we go out to the gig, you know. So I became like a family member for quite a while.
Noel Keelan was one of our great piano players, wasn't he? I mean, his career as a studio musician, as well as everything else, was just spanned a huge amount of time.
Yeah, and that band that Flav had at that time, I mean, they had John Waterman on drums, Martin Walsh on bass, Johnny Tate on trombone, Benny McNeil on trumpet, and Noel on piano. It was just legendary stuff, you know.
And they didn't just play with local acts. I mean, they went on to play. They played with people like Tubby Hayes and even Ronnie Scott and people like that, didn't they?
Yeah, and Benny Goodman too.
Yeah. Then you're coming on to people like Louis Stewart. Obviously, played with Benny Goodman for a long time.
He did. Yeah, some great talent has come out of Ireland. You know, it's incredible the talent that's come out of there.
And yet, when you consider, Jim, all these great talents, I mean, it was the show bands that actually made money, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they did. They made good money, you know. But a lot of the show bands, and I have to say that a percentage of the show bands, I wouldn't say every one of them, but a big majority of the show bands never played on their records.
That wasn't their fault. I mean, not
at all. It was the reason for it was that it was a time thing as well. So somebody like Noel Keelan would do an arrangement for trumpet, sax, and trombone, and a rhythm section. They'd write out the rhythm section parts as well, and they would just go in and do it in 5 minutes. Whereas the band would go in and somebody would make a mistake, and it might go on for 2 hours. You know, so it was quicker.
Do you agree that was one of the reasons that many of the show band records sounded bland, that they sounded the same? Guys were playing on them. A
lot of these guys had no interest in pop music. A lot of them were jazz people who hated anything to do with popular music, you know. So, like, I remember going to America with another show band, and we met up with Lionel Hampton All Stars, and I had a long conversation with the trumpet player. And I said to him, "Are you getting many gigs, you know?" And he said, "No." He said, "The only gigs I'm getting now," he says, "I'm playing on a lot of rock and roll records." So that's where they were making their living. So you had all these leading star musicians who couldn't get gigs playing what they wanted to play. So they were diversifying into wherever they could get work. And this trumpet player, who was a legend, was playing on rock and roll records.
And when you consider, as you say, they were playing on music that they didn't like, and that was detrimental, really, to the recording industry eventually. Although it was quick, but it's a sad thing that some of these fabulous musicians that went through the show bands, and when you consider the show bands was the apprenticeship and the training ground for so many great artists right around the world, from Rory Gallagher to Henry McCullough and all of these great players. And you had brass players like Paddy Byrne and the McIntyres, Joe McIntyre and Josie McIntyre then on the sax, and people like that from Derry.
Joe Mac played with me with Johnny Flynn, you know.
But isn't it very sad that there aren't recordings of these people, whereas the expediency won out and they just went to the management, hired a small group of session musicians, and that's something we've lost.
Yeah, so the only one who really would play on or would be on the record would be the singer.
In the early recordings, there wasn't multi-tracking, so somebody had to sing along with you, so it was pretty impossible to sing your own harmonies, wasn't it?
It was all live stuff, you know. Yeah,
all live, yeah. The other aspect I always thought was sad was the fact that as you say, Noel Keelan, the great Noel Keelan, would sit down and do an arrangement, whereas there were fabulous arrangers in the show bands who didn't get an opportunity to show off how well their arrangements would have sounded as well. And we've missed out on that.
Like Tommy O'Rourke, for instance. You know, sometimes there were a lot of people in the show band thing who had learned by ear.
Yeah.
who couldn't read music. So they would have been stumbling to survive in a studio.
But at that, I think the Beatles gave us all hope, because up until the Beatles, you would have had, even in England, you would have had a lot of session players. Any session players played on some of the early Beatles stuff as well. But having said that, it gave credibility to people like Paul McCartney. Never read, didn't read music, neither did John Lennon or George Harrison. None of the Beatles, the Stones, these people didn't read. Of course, the Beatles had George Martin there to do, if they came up with an idea, say they wanted cellos on Eleanor Rigby or something like that, George Martin would score it out, couldn't he? But it's a pity that there wasn't that sort of freedom at the time. Business was interfering, and they were saying, well, time is money, so we can't let you guys do it. So I think a lot of the show bands, the talent that was in it certainly isn't reflected on the recordings that they did.
No, one thing that springs to mind is, Move It, Cliff Richard.
Yeah.
The guitar solo at the intro wasn't Hank Marvin. It was a 60-year-old musician. He just went in. He was a session guy, and he just went in and did it in one go.
Look, I'm guilty. I did lots. I played on lots of other people's records as well at the time. But you always end up having your own stamp on it, as opposed to some really good player in a show band or a beat group or something like that. I think that's one of the casualties, that we don't get to hear recordings of some of these great players who were around during the show band time. It's a complicated thing. What happened with the Miami Showband when you were doing a lot of work and then all of a sudden you decided to leave?
Well, I was just started to study at uni, and I had this great job with a big pension at Guinness's. And then after, Joe Tyrrell came to me one day and he said, look, we're going to go professional. And I said, oh, yeah. So he said, yeah, you'll have to pack up work and pack up uni and do all that stuff. And I thought, So I went home and I had a chat with my father about it. And he said, let's go and talk to the union, musicians union, because the musicians union at that time were very strong. So I went along with him. We met Jack Flaub. And Jack was adamant that the show band thing was only a flash in the pan and that it wouldn't last. And in a few months' time, I'd find myself out of work with nothing to do. And I'd have lost my job, and I'd broken my study thing. So he made it sound really bad. And so we went home, and my father said, maybe that man that we spoke to is, he knows. He's the secretary of the musicians. He knows what's going on. And I said, yeah, but this is bigger than Ben Hoare, and he's never been in a situation like this. He's played in bands, yeah, but. And he said, no, well, maybe this time, maybe just finish your studies. And then when you do that, then do whatever you want then, hit the road. So that's what I did. I went back and I told Joe Tyrrell that I wasn't going to stay. And for probably 2 months, every night he'd say to me, no, this is going to be huge. You have to stay. You have to stay. And it really broke I've discussed it with you before. It really did affect me big time. But I just had this loyalty to my folks. And that's why I left. I thought the secretary of the Musicians Union, he must know something that I don't know. And this way, at least I'll have something for the future. And if I give it all away and this falls through, I've got nothing, so, and that was my logic, plus making my folks happy. And so, yeah, they were shopping around who was going to take over. And they had a few people in mind, and then Dickie got the job. But shortly after Dickie started with them, there was a knock on our door at home, and it was this secretary of the Federation of Musicians guy who told me that show bands were only a flash in the pan and it wouldn't last, asking me to join his orchestra. So to this day, I'm not sure if he set it up so that he'd get me out of one band to go and be in his band. But that's what happened. And I joined the orchestra, which was probably one of the best things that I ever did, because it made a big change to me as far as music goes. I became more affluent with the different concepts of music there were, and I learned what people were trying to do with the music rather than just sing words. You know, I learned to appreciate the lyrics in a song, which I never did before. You know, so, and that was all to do with Noel Keelan, you know, because that was the band that I went to.
There was a link between the singers in the Miami, I mean, obviously yourself and Dickie Rock, that you were both still very, very influenced by the big singers at the time, Tony Bennett and Sinatra, and I think you often mention Dick Haymes.
Yeah,
a big influence as well. Those singers and the songs that they made famous featured in both your program and Dickie Rock's program up until the present day. Yeah,
yeah. Well, I've just done one here now with 17 songs on it. I just had it here to show you that one, which is called Sinatra Plus, and it's I've always liked Sinatra, and I've always wanted to do a little selection of his songs. And now that I'm getting a bit long on the tooth, but I can still sing, I thought I better do it before I pop off, you know. So I only did this about 3 weeks ago. So
you've done a lot of recording, haven't you? I mean, you live you've lived in Australia for a long time, and you've continued your career. There is this touch of easy listening or jazz or whatever it is, this smooth, groovy type thing in your set has always been there, hasn't it?
Yeah. I think maybe I'm a lazy singer. I don't know. But yeah, I've always liked the sort of the smoothie kind of stuff, you know. Like Dick Haymes is a big favorite of mine too. I actually met the guy in Dublin in the 60s too, with that big orchestra. They were backing him on a TV show, and that for me was an experience as well, like, to meet the man close up like that and talk to him for hours into the early morning, you know, about music. Fascinating people. At one stage, he was bigger than Sinatra. For 2 years running, he was the #1 vocalist in America. And he followed Sinatra's career. Like when Sinatra left Harry James, Dick Haymes took his place. And when Sinatra left Tommy Dorsey, Dick Haymes took his place too. And then Sinatra went solo, and he went solo. And then Sinatra made movies, and he made movies. So they had a very similar career.
I mean, people listening to you today and watching you today will obviously say to themselves, you know, I wonder, you know, what direction the Miami would have taken had you stayed with the Miami. Do you think Dickie was into rock and roll and always has been, and he was even recording covers of Chuck Berry songs? Would you have done that?
I did, because the band that I joined after that orchestra was another show band. We recorded a Chuck Berry song, Nadine.
What band was that?
I'm trying to think of the name of it now. The Aaron Showband.
The Aaron. Where were they based, Jim?
In Dublin.
In Dublin.
It was Nadine on one side and a song called Words on the other, which I got off Butch Moore. Butch Moore gave me this song, and because he knew I was going to go in and record. And he said, I've just got this song. It's an old Pat Boone song, but he said, it's great. And Butch Moore and I were really good friends. And so I listened to it, and it was a really nice song. It was a Pat Boone song. And so I took that, and we recorded that and Nadine. And it went to, I've got a poster somebody sent me years ago of the top 30, I think it is. And Words is #2, and Nadine is #3.
I remember Dickie doing songs like 20 Flight Rock and rock and roll music and things like that. So
Yeah, I did that.
Would that have featured in your program for the other Showbands that you joined? Yeah,
I did all the Beatles stuff too. So yeah, like his style and my style were very similar.
The big question, I mean, did you regret leaving the band afterwards when you saw that Jack Flav was clearly wrong and that it wasn't a flash in the pan?
Yeah, still do. All these years later, you know, and we talked about this in Cork several years ago.
Having said that, I mean, you know, there is this spectre behind all of this that I often think that perhaps the guys who left the band, obviously when Tommy and Dennis and Martin left the band left the Miami in 1967 to form the Sands. Clearly yourself as well could have saved your lives.
Yeah, you mentioned that to me, and that sort of woke me up a little bit, to be honest. When we came away, my wife said to me, "See, I told you, there's a good story behind the bad story, you know," and that's a few years ago now. But when you said that to me that night, it sort of took on a different story for me. It made me think that, well, maybe it's not too bad after all. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, what's meant to be is meant to be.
Yeah.
And thank God you're still here.
But you know, having said all that, and I know I still sort of live with this thing, but there's lots of things that I've done since then that I would never have done had I have stayed in the Miami. So in a way, there's good and bad. You know, like I would have missed out on a lot of stuff that I've done over the last 20 years, 30 years.
And you've established a wonderful life for yourself in Western Australia, and you've got your own radio show every week, twice a week.
Yeah, twice a week. Yeah, Wednesdays and Sundays, which is really good. The Wednesday one is I just play everything and anything, and I play a lot of Irish comedy. I do a lot of Noel McGuinnessy, Brendan Grace, all the favourites, and I play little snippets of them between songs, you know, and so I still maintain that sort of Irish connection. And I play Irish tracks. Last week I played Joe Dolan, and the week before I played Sonny, who was one of my best friends, and this Wednesday I'm going to play a friend of yours.
That's Liam Dwyer.
Yeah,
inspirational Liam, who fought his way back from a serious stroke.
I just set it up today, so I'm doing Reason to Believe.
Oh, Reason, yeah, good song too. Right. Don't forget to play Annie.
I will next week.
So and you get to you travel back and forward yourself and Annette to Germany, don't you?
Yeah. I've done gigs in Germany too. Yeah, so that's been good as well.
And you've even come back here and done some gigs, haven't you, over the years in Ireland?
Yeah, not a lot. I would have liked to do more, but the opportunities never come. So yeah, that's it. But I did a great one with a dear friend who's not well at the moment. That's Ian McGarry.
Great drummer.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And that was a strange gig because he sent me a message to say that he knew I was in Dublin and we were trying to catch up. And he said, we're playing in a pub in Georgia Street. Why don't you come along? And it was the last night before I left to come back to Australia. And Annette and my sister drove us in, and we went to the gig, and it was packed. It was a small little pub in the middle of Georgia Street. And it was owned by the trumpet player who used to be with the Capitol. He was the original trumpet player with the Capitol. I forget his name now. But he owned the pub. And so we crushed through the crowd and got to the stage, and Ian gave me a wave with a stick, and I gave him a wave back and yelled across that we'd catch up at the break. And I said, yeah, okay. So I'm looking at the stage, and I see this tall guy, bald head, sax player, And I'm thinking, God, I know him. And then I'm thinking, no, it couldn't be. But it was Jim Farley, you know. So he's playing sax and clarinet. And then the piano player waved at me like that. And I just waved back. And the bass player waved. And then they were taking a break. So Annette and I moved back to the back of the place. And Ian came over. And we had a big catch up. Okay, I hadn't spoken to Ian because we went to school together. We started an accordion band together in the school. Ian was playing cymbals and went on to become the drummer. Yeah, but that's a long time ago.
Ian was also did very well as a producer in RTE, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, very well. He did really well. He's a very talented guy, very talented. But that night we were talking and he said to me, do you know Chris Kennedy? And I said, oh, yeah, Chris used to play the accordion as well. I said, really talented guy. And my words to him were, is he still around? You know? And I said, that's him there playing the piano. Yeah. So Chris Kennedy went to my school. Ian Gary went to my school. Jim Farley went to my school. And I got up and I sang a couple of songs that night. So there was 5 of us, or 4 of us on the stage that night that went to school, the same school. It was really ironic. It was like a school reunion in a pub in Georgia Street.
And it doesn't get any more talented than the names you've mentioned. I mean, Jim Farley has been the iconic sax player for
and you know what I liked about it too, and Annette said to me afterwards, she said it was just amazing the way that they were all in tune with you. I did a song, Leroy Brown, and I do it in G up to A flat, and so I'm in the middle of the song and I went like that, you know, meaning I'm going up. Yeah. And they all just, Chris Kennedy played the intro, da-da-da-da, and upscaled to A flat and did the thing in A flat. And she was blown away because there was no words mentioned. We didn't say what we're going to do in the middle, no change of key, nothing. I just did one signal. And that was all. And everybody knew what was going on. And that's the way it used to be in the music business. You know, you didn't have to sit down for a half an hour telling them what you were going to do and how you were going to do it. You just gave signals on the stage. 2 fingers down, 3 down. Yeah. It
was an amazing apprenticeship, Jim, that you had. And people often say, I mean, I remember recording with Henry McCullough. I was producing Henry, sure, not too long before he died, actually. And he said that his apprenticeship, that what made him was the Showbands. When he had played with the Gene, the Gents, obviously, and the Skyrockets and bands like that.
And so did Van.
Van Morrison played with a band. Band. He wasn't even the singer. He was a sax player with a band called the Monarchs, not to be confused with Tommy Drennan's Monarchs, but George Jones. Yeah,
he was the sax player.
So they all learned their Rory Gallagher played with the Impact Showband and the Fontana Showband here in Cork. Yeah. So it was a fantastic apprenticeship. I came into it a bit later than you, but it always fascinates me the guys who saw this actual transition. This was the word we used earlier on, the revolution that got the sit-down musicians to stand up, kick away the music stands and eyeball the audience. It was such an exciting time, wasn't it? And you were part of it, living legend.
They pulled the crowd in, you know, instead of pushing them away. You know, the crowd came to the band. It became part of the whole thing, which is what I think the bands were doing. And they were actually communicating better and 100% with the crowd. They wanted the crowd to like them. I think that's really the truth of it. You know, they really wanted the crowd to like them. Whereas the sit-down musos didn't care. They were going to get their £5, whether they smile or whatever. They were smoking on stage. It's ridiculous. Yeah, there were wild times, you know.
And from a historical point of view, I mean, you were the singer that helped to establish the Miami Showband in the first place. I mean, obviously without that lineup, without yourself and Martin and Tommy and the lads in the band, it wouldn't have taken off. And then it evolved from there. But you were there at the very start and helped to establish that band, one of the great iconic bands of Irish bands of all time that are perhaps live in history for more than just the music. Obviously, the incident as well, or the tragedy. But you are part of the history, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but if you ask anybody who's Jimmy Harte, they wouldn't have a clue. You know, and that's the truth.
Yeah, but we know, and hopefully now a lot of people will see that how the Miami actually started. When you started the Miami, I was only 11 years old. And
I was only 12. I was
a boy genius like myself.
Yeah, I started very young, you know.
Yeah. So it's been an absolute privilege to talk to you, Jim, because you know, you're not only part of Irish showband history roots, you're part of my roots as well, because I'm forever inextricably linked with the band.
I remember you saying one thing to me, and it always stuck in my mind, that when we met for the first time, and you said to me, "For me, this is you. For me, this is full circle." And I never forgot that.
Yeah, it is.
I thought that was a really cool way to put a situation.
Hopefully, and I think it will be for people young and old listening to you today, completes the circle for that particular band as well, because there are lots and lots of young students who have studied the Miami, clearly drawn into it because of the tragedy of 75, but who now will have a better idea of the context of the band. And so long may you keep on performing and singing and keep on inspiring us, and we'll talk again soon.
We will indeed. We'll never stop talking. Cheers, Steve. Thanks very much.